And would any other person? No, I don't think so. Not on this reasoning, anyhow. I was right then, when I said that neither you, nor I, nor any other person would take doing what's unjust over suffering it. Or it really is something worse. For it really is something worse. So it appears. So you see, Polus, that when the one refutation is compared with the other, there is no resemblance at all, whereas everyone but me agrees with you. You are all I need, although you are just a party of one, for your agreement and testimony. It's you alone whom I call on for a vote. The others I disregard. Let this be our verdict on this matter, then. Let's next consider the second point in dispute between us. That is, whether a wrongdoer's paying what is due is the worst. Let's next consider the second point in dispute between us. That is, whether a wrongdoer's paying what is due is the worst thing there is, as you were supposing, or whether his not paying is even worse, as I was. Let's look at it this way. Are you saying that paying what is due and being justly disciplined for doing wrong are the same thing? Yes, I do. Can you say, then, that all just things aren't admirable insofar as they are just? Think carefully and tell me. Yes, I think they are. Consider this point too. If someone acts upon something, there also has to be something that has something done to it by the one acting upon it. Yes, I think so. And that it has done it to it what the thing acting upon it does. And in that sort of way, the thing acting upon it does it. I mean, for example, if somebody hits, there has to be something that's being hit. There has to be. And if the hitter hits hard or quickly, the thing being hit that way too. Yes. So the thing being hit gets acted upon in whatever way the thing hitting thing. This is rather difficult, to be frank. So the thing being hit gets acted upon in whatever way the hitting thing acts upon it. Yes, that's right. So too, if somebody performs surgical burning, then there has to be something that's being burned. Of course. And if he burns severely or painfully, the thing that's being burned is burned in whatever way the burning thing burns it. That's right. Doesn't the same account also hold if a person makes a surgical cut, for something is being cut? Yes. And if the cut is large or deep or painful, the thing being cut is cut in whatever way the cutting thing cuts it. So it appears. Summing it up, see if you agree with what I was saying just now, that in all cases, in whatever way the thing acting upon something acts upon it, the thing acted upon is acted upon in just that way. Yes, I do agree. Taking this as agreed, is paying what is due a case of being acted upon or of acting upon something? It must be a case of being acted upon, Socrates. By someone who acts, of course, by the one administrating discipline. Now, one who disciplines correctly disciplines justly. Yes, thereby acting justly or not. Yes, justly. So the one being disciplined is being acted upon justly when he pays what is due, apparently. And it was agreed, I take it, that just things are admirable. That's right. So one of these men does admirable things, and the other one, being disciplined, has admirable things done to him. Yes, if they are admirable, then aren't they good? For neither, for they're either pleasant or beneficial. Necessarily so. Hence, The one paying what is due has good things being done to him, evidently. Hence, he's being benefited. Yes. Is his benefit the one I take it to be? Does his soul undergo improvement if he's justly disciplined? Yes, that is likely. Hence, one who pays what is due gets rid of something bad in his soul. Yes. Now, is the bad thing he gets rid of the most serious one? Consider it this way. In the matter of a person's financial condition, do you detect any bad thing other than poverty? No, just poverty. What about that of a person's physical condition? Would you say that what is bad here consists of weakness, disease, ugliness, and the like? Yes, I would. Do you believe that there's also some corrupt condition of the soul? Of course. And don't you call this condition injustice, ignorance, cowardice, and the like? Yes, certainly. Of these three things, one's finances, one's body, and one's soul, you said there are three states of corruption, namely poverty, disease, and injustice. Yes. Which of these states of corruption is the most shameful? Isn't it injustice and corruption of one's soul in general? Very much so. And if it's the most shameful, it's also the worst? What do you mean, Socrates? I mean this. What we agreed on earlier implies that what's most shameful is so always because it's the source either of the greatest pain or of harm, or of both. Very much so. And now we've agreed that injustice and corruption of soul as a whole is the most shameful thing. So we have. So either it's most painful and is most shameful because it surpasses the others in pain, or else in harm, or in both, necessarily so. Now, isn't being unjust, undisciplined, cowardly, and ignorant more painful than being poor or sick? No, I don't think so, Socrates. Given what we said, anyhow. So the reason that corruption of one's soul is the most shameful of them all is that it surpasses the others by some monstrously great harm and outstanding badness, since it doesn't surpass them in pain, according to your reasoning. So it appears. But what is surpassing in greatest harm would, I take it, certainly be the worst thing there is. Yes. Injustice, then, lacks of discipline, and all other forms of corruption of soul are the worst thing there is. Apparently so. Now, what is the craft that gets rid of poverty? Isn't that of financial management? Yes. What's the one that gets rid of disease? Isn't that of medicine? Necessarily. What's the one that gets rid of corruption and injustice? If you're stuck, look at it this way. Where and to whom do we take people who are physically sick? To doctors, Socrates. Where do we take people who behave unjustly and without discipline? To judges, you mean? Isn't it so they'll pay what's due? Yes, I agree. Now, don't those who administer discipline correctly employ a kind of justice in doing so? That's clear. It's financial management, then, that gets rid of poverty, medicine that gets rid of disease, and justice that gets rid of injustice and indiscipline, apparently. Which of these now is the most admirable? Of which do you mean? Of financial management, medicine, and justice. Justice is by far, Socrates. Doesn't it, in that case, provide either the most pleasure or benefit, or both, if it really is the most admirable? Yes. Now, is getting medical treatment something pleasant? Do people enjoy getting it? No, I don't think so. But it is beneficial, isn't it? Yes, because they're getting rid of something very bad, so that it's worth their while to endure the pain and so get well. Of course. Now, would a man be happiest, as far as his body goes, if he's under treatment, or if he weren't even sick to begin with? If he weren't even sick to begin with, obviously. Because happiness evidently isn't a matter of getting rid of something bad, it's rather a matter of not even contracting it to begin with. That's so. Very well. Of two people, each of whom has something bad in either body or soul, which is the more miserable one? The one who is treated and gets rid of the bad thing, or the one who doesn't but keeps it? The one who isn't treated, it seems to me. Now, wasn't paying what's due getting rid of the worst thing there is, corruption? It was. Yes, because such justice makes people self-controlled. I take it, and more just. I take it, and more just. It proves to be a treatment against corruption. Yes, the happiest man, then, is the one who doesn't have any badness in his soul. Now, that this has been shown in the most serious kind of badness, that's clear. And second, I suppose, is the man who gets rid of it, evidently. This is the man who gets lectured and lashed, and the one who pays what is due. Yes, the man who keeps it, then, and who doesn't get rid of it is the one whose life is the worst. Apparently, isn't this actually the man who, although he commits the most serious crimes and uses methods that are most unjust, succeeds in avoiding being lectured and disciplined and paying his dues, as Archelaus, according to you, and other tyrants, orators, and potentates have put themselves in a position to do? Evidently. Yes, my good man, I take it that these people have managed to accomplish pretty much the same thing as a person who has contracted a very serious illness, but by avoiding treatment manages to avoid paying what's due to the doctor for his bodily faults, fearing as he would a child cauterization or surgery because they're painful. Don't you think so too? Yes, I do. It's because he evidently doesn't know what health and bodily excellence are like. For on the basis of what we're now agreed on, it's because he evidently doesn't know what health and bodily excellence are like. For on the basis of what we're now agreed on, it looks as though those who avoid paying what is due also do the same sort of thing, Polus. They focus on its painfulness, but are blind to its benefits, and are ignorant of how much more miserable it is to live with an unhealthy soul than with an unhealthy body, a soul that's rotten with injustice and impiety. This is also the reason they go to any length to avoid paying what is due and getting rid of the worst thing there is. They find themselves funds and friends and ways to speak as persuasively as possible. Now, what we're agreed on is true, Polus. Are you aware of what things follow from our argument, or would you like us to set them out? Yes, if you think we should, anyhow. Does it follow that injustice and doing what is unjust is the worst thing there is? Yes, apparently. And it has indeed been shown that paying what is due is what gets rid of this bad thing. So it seems. And that it isn't paid, the bad thing, and that if it isn't paid, the bad thing is retained. Yes. So doing what's unjust is the second worst thing. Not paying what's due when one has done what's unjust is by its nature the first worst thing, and the very worst thing. Evidently. Now, wasn't this the point in dispute between us, my friend? You consider Archelaus a happy man who committed the gravest crimes without paying what was due, whereas I took the opposite view, that whoever avoids paying his due for his wrongdoing, whether he's Archelaus or any other man, is and deserves to be miserable beyond all other men, and that one who does what's unjust is always more miserable than the one who suffers it, and the one who avoids paying what's due always more miserable than the one who pays it. Weren't these the things I said? Yes. Hasn't it been proved that what was said is true? Apparently. Fair enough. If these things are true then, Polus, what is the great use of oratory? For on the basis of what we agreed on now, what a man should guard himself against most of all is doing what's unjust, knowing that he will have trouble enough if he does. Isn't that so? Yes, that's right. And if he or anyone else he cares about acts unjustly, he should voluntarily go to the place where he'll pay his dues as soon as possible. He should go to the judge as though he were going to a doctor, anxious that the disease of injustice should be protracted and cause his soul to fester incurably. What else can we say, Polus, if our previous agreement really stands? Aren't these statements necessarily consistent with our earlier ones in only this way? Well, yes, Socrates. What else are we to say? So if oratory is used to defend injustice, Polus, one's own or that of one's relatives, companions or children's, or that of one's country, when it acts unjustly, it is of no use at all, unless one takes it to be useful for the opposite purpose. What he should accuse himself first and foremost, and then to his family and anyone else dear to him, happens to behave unjustly at any time, and that he should not keep his wrongdoing hidden, but bring it out into the open, that he may pay his dues and get well, and compel himself and the others not to play the coward, but to grit his teeth and present himself with grace and courage as to a doctor for cauterization and surgery, pursuing what's good and admirable without taking any account of the pain. And if his unjust behavior merits flogging, he should present himself to be whipped. If it merits imprisonment, to be imprisoned. If a fine, to pay it. If a fine, to pay it. If exile, to be exiled. And if execution, to be executed. He should be his own chief accuser, and the accuser of other members of his family, and use his oratory for the purpose of getting rid of the worst thing there is, injustice. As the unjust acts are being exposed, are we to affirm or deny this, Polus? I think these statements are absurd, Socrates, though no doubt you think they agree with those expressed earlier. Then, either we should abandon those, or else these necessarily follow. Yes, that's how it is. And, on the other hand, to reverse the case, suppose a man had to harm someone, an enemy, or anybody at all, provided that he didn't suffer anything unjust from his enemy himself, for this is something to be on guard against. If the enemy did something unjust against another person, then our man should see to it in every way, both in what he does and what he says, and that his enemy does not go to the judge and pay his due. And if he does go, he should scheme to get his enemy off without paying what's due. If he's stolen a lot of good, he should scheme to get him not to return it, but to keep it and spend it in an unjust and godless way, both on himself and his people. And if his crimes merit death penalty, he should scheme to keep him from being executed, preferably never to die at all, but to live forever in corruption. But failing that, to have him live as long as possible in that condition. Yes, this is the sort of thing I think oratory is useful for, Polus. Since for the person who has no intention of behaving unjustly, it doesn't seem to me to have much use, if in fact it has any use at all, since its usefulness hasn't in any way become apparent so far. What just happened? So this dude said, tell me, Sheriffone, is Socrates in earnest about this, or is he joking? I think he's in dead earnest about this, Callias. There's nothing like asking him, though. By the gods, just the thing I'm eager to do. Tell me, Socrates, are we to take you as being in earnest now, or joking? Or if you are in earnest, are these things you are saying really true? Won't this human life of ours be turned upside down, and won't everything we do evidently be the opposite of what we should do? Well, Calis, Caliclis, if human beings didn't share common experiences, some sharing one, others sharing another, but one of us had some unique experience not shared by others, it wouldn't be easy for him to communicate what he experienced to the others. I say this because I communicate what he experienced to the others. I say this because I realize that you and I are both now actually sharing a common experience. Each of the two of us is a lover of two subjects. I, Alcibiades, Plinius' son, and of philosophy, and you of the Demos, people of Athens, and Demos, who's the son of. I noticed that in I notice that in each case you're unable to contradict your beloved, clever though you are, no matter what he says or what he claims is so. You keep shifting back and forth. If you say anything in the assembly, and the Athenian Demos denies it, you shift your ground and say what it wants to hear. Other things like this happen to you when you're with the good-looking young men, uh, and the son of Perleompus. You're unable to oppose what your beloveds say or propose, so that if someone heard you say what you do on their account and was amazed at how absurd that is, you'd probably say, if you were minded to tell him the truth, that unless somebody stops your beloved from saying what they say, they'll never stop saying these things either. In that case, you must believe that you're bound to hear me say things like that too. And instead of being surprised at me saying them, you must stop my beloved philosophy from saying them. For she always says what you now hear me say, my dear friend, and she's by far less fickle than any other beloved. As for that son of Clinias, what he says differs from one time to the next, but what philosophy says always stays the same. And she's saying things that now astound you, although you were present when they were said. So either refute her and show that doing what's unjust without paying what is due, for it's not the ultimate of all bad, as I just now say it is, or else, if you leave this unrefuted, then by the dog, the god of Egyptians, Calisius, will not agree with you. Calisius, but will be dissonant with you all your life long. And yet, for my part, my good man, I think it better to have my lyre, a chorus, that I might lead out of tune and dissonant, and have the vast majority of men disagree with me and contradict me, than to be out of harmony with myself, to contradict myself, though only I am only one person. As for that son, Clinias, what he says differs from one time to the next, but what philosophy says always stays the same, and she's saying things that now astound you, although you were present when they were said. So either refute her and show that doing what's unjust without paying what is due, for it is not the ultimate of all bad things, as I say now it is. Or else, if you leave this unrefuted, then by the dog, the god. I hope this is working. Headphones on. Then by the dog, the god of the Egyptians, Callias, will not agree with you, Callias, but will be dissonant with you all your life long. And yet, for my part, my good man, I think it's better to have my lyre or a chorus that I might lead out of tune and dissonant, and have the vast majority of men disagree with me and contradict me, than to be out of harmony with myself, to contradict myself, though I'm only one person. Socrates, I think you're grandstanding in these speeches, acting like a true crowd pleaser. Here you are, playing to the crowd now, that Polus has had the same thing happen to him that he accused Gorgias of letting you do to him. For he said, didn't he, that when Gorgias was asked by you whether he would teach anyone who came to him wanting to learn oratory, but without expertise in what's just, Gorgias was ashamed, and out of deference to human custom, since people would take it ill if a person refused, said that he'd teach him. And because Gorgias agreed on this point, he said he was forced to contradict himself. Just the thing you like. He ridiculed you at that time, and rightly so, as I think, anyhow. And now the very same thing has happened to him, and for this same reason I don't approve of Polus. He agreed with you that doing what's unjust is more shameful than suffering it. As a result of this admission, he was bound and gagged by you in the discussion, too ashamed to say what he thought. Although you claim to be pursuing the truth, you're in fact bringing the discussion around to the sort of crowd-pleasing vulgarities that are admirable only by law and not by nature. And these nature and law are, for the most part, opposed to each other. So if a person is ashamed and doesn't dare to say what he thinks, he's forced to contradict himself. This is in fact a clever trick you've thought of, with which you work mischievous in your discussions. If a person makes a statement in terms of nature, you question him in terms of law. That's just what happened here. On the question of doing what's unjust versus suffering it, while Polus meant doing it is more shameful by law, you pursued the argument as though he meant by nature. For by nature all that is worse is also more shameful, like suffering what's unjust, whereas by law doing it is more shameful. No, no man would put up with suffering what's unjust. Only a slave would do so, one who is better dead than alive, who, when he's treated unjustly and abused, can't protect himself or anyone else he cares about. I believe that the people who institute our laws are the weak and the many. So they institute laws and assign praise and blame with themselves and their own advantage in mind, as a way of frightening the more powerful among men, the ones who are capable of having a greater share out of getting a greater share than they. They say that getting more than one's share is shameful and unjust, and that doing what's unjust is nothing but trying to get more than one's share. I think they like getting an equal share, since they are inferior. These are the reasons why trying to get a greater share than most is said to be unjust and shameful by law, and while they call it doing what's unjust, but I believe that nature itself reveals that it is a just thing for the better man and the more capable man to have a greater share than the worse man and the less capable man. Nature shows that this is so in many places, both among the other animals and whole cities and races of men. It shows that this is what justice has been decided to be, that the superior rule the inferior, and the greater share than they, and have the greater share than they. For what sort of justice did Xerxes go by when he campaigned against Greece, or his father when he campaigned against Scythia? Countless other such examples could be mentioned. I believe that these men do these things in accordance with the nature of what's just, yes, by Zeus, in accordance with the law of nature, and presumably not with the one we institute. We mold the best and the most powerful among us, taking them while they're still young, like lion cubs, and with charms and incantations we subdue them into slavery, telling them that one is supposed to get one telling them that one is supposed to get no more than his fair share, and that that's what's admirable and just. But surely, if a man whose nature is equal to it arises, he will shake off, tear apart, and escape all this. He will trample underfoot our documents, our tricks and charms, and all our laws, and violate nature. He, the slave, will rise up and revealed He, the slave, will rise up and be revealed as our masters, and here the justice of nature will shine forth. I think Pindar, too, refers to what I'm saying in that song in which he says that Law, the king of mortals and the immortal gods. This, he says, bring on and renders just what is most violent. With towering hand, I take as proof of this the deeds of Hercules, for he, unbought. His words are like something like that. I don't know the song well. He says that Hercules drove off Gerion's cattle, even though he hadn't paid for them, and Gerion hadn't given them to him, on the grounds that this is just by nature, and the cattle and all the other possessions of those who are worse and inferior belong to those who's better and superior. This is the truth of the matter, as you will acknowledge if you abandon the philosophy and move on to more important things. Philosophy is no doubt a delightful thing, Socrates, as long as one is exposed to it in moderation at the appropriate time of their life. But if one spends more time with it than he should, it's a man's undoing. For even if one is naturally well favored, but engages in philosophy far beyond that appropriate time of life, he can't help but turn out to be inexperienced in everything a man has to be admirable and good and well thought. He can't help but turn out to be inexperienced in everything a man who's to be admirable and good and well thought of is supposed to be experienced in. Such people turn out to be inexperienced in the laws of their cities, or in the kind of speech one must use to deal with people on matters of business, whether in public or private, inexperienced also in human pleasures and appetites, and in short, inexperienced in the ways of human beings altogether. So when they venture into some private or political activity, they become a laughingstock, as I suppose men in politics do when they venture into your pursuits and your kind of speech. What results is Euripides saying, where he says, each man shines. In this he presses on to this, allotting the greatest part of the day to this, where he finds himself at his best. And whatever a man's inferior in, he avoids and rails against, while he praises the other thing, thinking well of himself, and supposing that in this way he praising himself. I believe, however, that it's the most appropriate to have share of both. To partake of as much philosophy as your education requires is an admirable thing, and it's not shameful to practice philosophy while you're a boy. But when you still do it after you've grown older and become a man, the thing gets to be ridiculous, Socrates. My own reaction to men who philosophize is very much like that to men who speak haltingly and play like children. When I see a child for whom it is still quite proper to make conversation this way, halting in its speech and playing like child, I'm delighted. I find it a delightful thing, a sign of good breeding, and appropriate for the child's age. And when I hear a small child speaking clearly, I think it's a harsh thing. It hurts my ears. I think it's something fit for a slave. But when one hears a man speaking haltingly or sees him playing like a child, it strikes me as ridiculous and unmanly, deserving of a flogging. Now, I react in the same way to men who engage in philosophy too. When I see philosophy in a young boy, I approve of it. I think it's appropriate and consider such a person well bred, whereas I consider one who doesn't engage in philosophy ill bred, one who will never count himself deserving of any admirable or noble thing. But when I see an older man still engaging in philosophy and not giving it up, I think such a man by this time needs a flogging. For, as I just now saying, it's typical that such a man, even if he's naturally very well favored, becomes unmanly and avoids the center of his city and the marketplaces, in which, according to the poet, men attain preeminence, and instead lives the rest of his life in hiding, whispering in a corner with 3 or 4 boys, never uttering anything well bred or important or apt. Socrates, I do. Wow, quite the speech. Quite the speech.